Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the gold standard Youth Inclusion in NDCs. Care About Climate's NDC Equity Tracker measures 3 components towards equitable NDCs. These components include intergenerational justice, gender mainstreaming, and ambitious emissions reduction targets. The tracker empowers youth to be climate leaders in global climate action. Care About Climate, We Are Family Foundation, and Groundswell developed the Universal NDC Youth Clause that proudly encompasses 3 pillars for intergenerational consideration in NDCs worldwide. These pillars are to appreciate, collaborate, and educate. These commitments set a gold standard for youth-inclusive, current and upcoming NDCs. For our event today, I will be your moderator, Zaina Zubair. And for our lovely panel, which I will now let introduce, Ruth, Italo, and Laya. Please.
Very much, Zaina. And thank you all for being here today. My name's Ruth Oviedo Hollins, and I am a program manager at Care About Climate. And I specifically focus on the NDC Equity Tracker, which, as Zaina's already kind of explained a little bit, really does measure how equitable an NDC is in terms of youth inclusion, gender equality, and ambitious emissions reductions. And we work with youth ambassadors from different countries around the world to let us know how well an NDC is doing in terms of their own perspective and provide recommendations that really can drive equitable and sustainable climate action for future generations.
Hi everyone. Firstly, thank you all for showing up. I am Laya Potunuri from We Are Family Foundation. I am here as a COP29 youth delegate. I am currently pursuing an MPhil in Engineering for Sustainable Development at University of Cambridge, and my work focuses on bridge building between technological innovations and their real-life implementation. So to explain in a simpler terms, my work is about making solutions affordable and accessible to everyone, and also working on the organizational gaps and working in those contexts with the indigenous communities and really making sure that the real life impact happens. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the SDG House for having us. Thank you to Care About Climate. My name is Italo Ribeiro. I am a humanitarian worker. I currently work as a PME specialist at UNICEF. I am also a We Are Family Foundation youth delegate here at COP29, and I am a PhD student at University for Peace, where I'm currently pursuing the area of peace and conflict studies, focusing primarily on climate mobilities. Very excited to be here to engage with you in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a few questions that we'd like to discuss this afternoon. So the first one I would like to ask the 3 of you is, why do you think the Universal NDC Youth Clause could be a game changer for climate action? Ruth?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. So essentially, this is a very impactful and important campaign that's long overdue. For many years now, young people, including children, have been really advocating and trying to get their countries to include them in these negotiation spaces, in climate change conversations and decision making. And as we approach the deadline of NDC 3.0, it's critical to ensure that there is language that supports the vulnerabilities of young people worldwide, and of course, the impact that they have the potential of creating in this climate policy. It goes beyond just what's going on in everyone's country, because as we all know, there is diverse solutions and also diverse conflicts that we are going through because of the climate crisis. As someone from the US, oftentimes I get asked, like, what is going on in the US? Because we typically see how more vulnerable communities are actually struggling in other countries, specifically in the global south and least developed countries. So like, why the US? Like, what is the US's role? And I often say the US actually has its fair share of climate catastrophes going on every single year. And just to kind of point out an example of that, this is historically the worst hurricane season that the U.S. has experienced in history. And so it's really important to kind of acknowledge that there are communities in the U.S. that are also struggling. There's young people who are so tired of constantly having to go through these events and having a government that potentially is not doing enough for these communities. And of course, as a country that is responsible for a lot of emissions, global emissions contributions, then it's important for the U.S. to be ambitious in reducing these and also provide climate finance, because those resources are available. And so with this clause, we really hope that in an international perspective, that all countries, including the U.S., acknowledge the need for young people to be part of these decision-making spaces, to be part of the development and the implementation of the NDCs, and hopefully get more countries to sign up and endorse this very important clause. Thank you.
Completely agree with all your points. I just want to add on by saying that this is such a pivotal moment in youth climate justice, because when we talk about youth, we usually just think of them as the protesters, but these youth also bring so much value to the spaces that we work in. And especially what I want to highlight today is young people are not just people who come and scream for youth climate justice. There are different types, age ranges, and we often ignore that, because when we're talking about young people, it's not just the teenagers or the people who are already doing something on their own. There are also young women who don't have access to education in some areas, and I think it kind of includes all these age ranges, and this is why it focuses on the interdependencies as well, because this could mean that the governments could provide access to education and other support to these people in some areas where it can deal with areas like conflict and peace, or it also interlinks with agriculture. So there is a lot of intersectoral things going on here, and that is something which is really exciting to me. So when I think of it, it is two different types. One is how we are supporting the people who are not even exposed to the space, the young people, like giving them training and support in terms of education, resources, and access to opportunities. And the second one is how the people who are already in this space enhance their work and scaling up and giving them funding. So I think this will push in both the aspects of it, and that is something I'm really excited for and why I think it is really important for climate action. Thank you.
I'm in full agreement with the two of you. I think just to give some context, this is a pivotal moment because it is important. Nowadays, over 2 billion children and youth worldwide are living in contexts that are under extreme high risk in terms of climate. We have these young people who are affected by water stress, drought, flooding at a very early age. They are still developing their bodies, their brain cell connections. There are studies that say that a young child develop 92% of their entire lives brain cell connections until the age of 6. So can you imagine what are the impacts of being under climate stress when you are a young child, and what that's going to reverberate when you become an adult in terms of impacts of lack of development you have reached just because you were under that kind of stress. Young people are also closest to the problem, and they are not simply watchers or observers of this. They are already acting upon it. They have community-based solutions that really focus on adaptation, resilience, mitigation, but many times they don't access the resources to be able to amplify their work. So it is important that policymaking, it is important that climate finance institutions are able to get in touch with young people, young children working and living in the field so that they can learn from their perspectives and incorporate that into their programming. But we are not just talking about developing a document that mentions children and youth or that boosts countries to add dimensions throughout their NDCs. I think beyond simply adding the terms to their NDCs, they have to think about how can they define specific areas that are crucial to children and how they can mainstream children and youth across those areas, such as nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene, health, education, so on and so forth. And under each of those areas in your NDCs, you should have specific funding targeting children and youth with specific indicators, with specific targets. And that's what's going to allow us as population and also development institutions to monitor the implementation of those NDCs. In addition, I have an example of how this could potentially work. For instance, there is a recent study by UNICEF and the Economist Impact, which is an arm of the Economist that does research on cost-benefit analysis for development interventions around the world, that says that in Tanzania and in Pakistan, every dollar invested into ensuring that a young person can access a school with electricity will eventually result in $3 of social and economic returns on that investment. So there are currently about 200 million children worldwide that do not have access to electricity in their schools. Can you imagine if these countries, that when they are developing their NDCs and they have a chapter or a section on energy resilience, if they had specific indicators about youth inclusion or investment in youth and children's inclusion, we could advance towards ensuring that these people are engaged in education, which is a human right. So to finalize here, I think it's important to advance getting signatures to the Youth Clause. This is a very innovative and needed initiative, but we also have to ensure that these governments, once they sign upon it, they can also be supported with the implementation steps of this clause in practice and concreteness. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful insight into the urgency to implement this clause and how inclusivity is very crucial and how we need actionable inclusivity to so many demographics just within youth and just within children, and how important it is to look at those specificities when adapting this clause. And I think that segues very well into the next question for you, which is, if you were a decision maker right now, what is the one intergenerational collaboration activity you would employ and why? Lai, I think I'd like to start with you for this one.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think when it comes to intergenerational collaboration, it's as an innovator, I often see a lot of innovations and creative solutions coming from the young people, but most of these are often just confined to research papers or articles or journals, but they're not really implemented in real life, and that's kind of what my work focuses on. So if I was a decision maker, I would really push for the impact of the solutions rather than just having solutions for the sake of it, because I know a lot of young innovators coming up with amazing solutions, making technologies accessible and affordable, but the problem just lies where they can't access the funding to scale up their solutions. They don't have access to opportunities. And even when they do, it's usually that they're just given like medals or trophies and accolades, but nothing that materializes these solutions into actual impact. So I think that is one thing that I would really like to push for and work with the communities, the young people who are making real change with their communities, and also lower the barriers for these young people to get into these spaces and be heard and not just be there for tokenization purposes. Because here in the COP convenings itself, we have probably like one representative from Youngo in the negotiations, and I can only understand like how many barriers like these people have to cross. Like you need to get through an organization, then make a way through it and build these relationships and like I don't know, just impress these older generations and make your way and build these connections for 5 to 6 years, and then somehow get trained by yourself on these negotiations and do unpaid work and study the policies on your own, and then get to this space, and all for just sitting there and being tokenized. And then people usually just say like, okay, just now let's hear the young voice in the room, and that's not how it is. It is something that has value as its own voice, and it's not just a young voice. And I think this is kind of like the perspective shift that I would like by really pushing for the impact. Yeah, that's something I would do.
Thank you. Ruth, what about you?
Yeah, I would really appreciate a more strategic approach to the way that youth are considered in policymaking in each country. So our NDC Equity Tracker report shows that over 60% of NDCs don't acknowledge or recognize a youth council or some sort of youth group that is directly influencing policy in each country. And that is an enormous gap because we come to spaces like this and we see youth, we see passion, we see drive, we see interest, we see knowledge. And so those voices are available everywhere, but the opportunity is not there, as you mentioned. And so in order for us to really give youth a voice, it's not about older generations making decisions for youth. It's about empowering youth to make their own decisions. And they have a unique perspective that is constantly being undervalued. And so it's important for everyone to stop and really think about what that could look like in the future in terms of considering these voices. And it's incredibly important because these are the future leaders worldwide. All these other generations, these older generations, everyone was once a young person. And so to be able to empower youth voices who will eventually fill in these shoes of these decision makers, these negotiators in these closed rooms that aren't even accessible to most, is critical to ensuring that they have a sustainable future and a knowledgeable future. There is a lot of information that is often gatekept from young people. And we see that in spaces like this. We see that in spaces back home in all of our countries. Most youth ambassadors that we have worked with have said as part of their recommendation that they wish that they had a voice within their local government, within their federal government. Like they want to be the ones who make these decisions in NDCs, these contributions to their NDCs. Because who better than to tell a story of the different challenges that young people face than the young people themselves. So it's really valuable and impactful to ensure that we are prioritizing their viewpoints when we make decisions, when we make policies, when NDCs are updated. And that's something that I really hope to see in the very near future. And I'm happy to say that we're already seeing that in some countries. And I would even dare to say and share with all of you that according to our data, it is the global South that really leads in that area. So that is super impactful and wonderful to see because they really are leading by example. Of course, there are some countries that still have to do a lot of work, and no NDC is perfect. I'm sure we all know here, but this could be a step the right direction to ensuring that we continue to empower and include vulnerable communities and like celebrate the intersectionality that makes up a young person.
When I think of engagement, of intergenerational collaboration in supporting youth inclusion in climate action, I always try to think of how can we get to where the young people are. It's really important that world leaders understand that they should be engaging with young people in their own spaces, and they should take advantage of that opportunity to validate all of these ideas, all of these initiatives related to how to integrate themselves. I think utilizing education for climate is extremely important. As part of the NDCs, there is one of the commitments that relates to education of young people on climate justice. I truly believe that education on climate justice should be compulsory as a subject matter at all levels of schooling across the world. I think this is the only way for us to create social and behavioral change at the lower bottom of the pyramid and ensure that people will not only understand the realities and how climate integrates with what they go through on a daily basis, but also how can they work with their teachers, with their classmates, with their communities on projects that will help them adapt to local conditions, that will help them to scale that to other communities. So it's really important to tap into such a strong potential for development of common solutions at the local level. Also, governments can ensure that they have the possibility to finance some of those initiatives that are scalable, they are able to reduce at a larger impact level the vulnerabilities of individuals. I think that in terms of in the context of COP, there are many ways in which we could engage in intergenerational collaboration. One of the solutions that we have been discussing in our own delegation is, well, what if we could have a cross-sectoral understanding and commitment to utilize a percentage of the budget dedicated to to renting a pavilion, to buying flight tickets to come to COP, to develop a fund that will target initiatives developed by young people in the Global South that relate to mitigation, that relate to adaptation. This is much more impactful because a lot of these young people, they come to these events and they try to take something away with them to the communities, and many times they go back empty-handed. It's not just about being able to sit in these rooms. We also have our own initiatives back home that we want to be able to contribute towards. So how can we materialize support to these individuals through the infrastructure that has been developed to support large, inexpensive events like this? And a fund like that could help us to leverage our initiatives and take the legacy from each COP back to our home communities. My country, Brazil, is going to be the next country to host COP 30. And it's advertising it as the Youth COP. But the way that you organize a Youth COP is not necessarily just by having more young people and more young people be as speakers or attendants in the events, is actually giving visibility to their initiatives and supporting them to scale and strengthen their initiatives. So if you want to create the Youth COP, you have to make sure that these young people are not going to go back to their communities empty-handed, that they will be able to be activated and supported so that they can contribute to national goals and targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was a nice mutual understanding that there is something very special and important about giving a lot of precedence to children and youth within their local spaces and really pushing them in their own skills within a very localized community, as opposed to bringing on very artificial methods and trying to implement that on them, whereas we should be utilizing what they bring to the table itself. Italo, I'm going to bring the next question back to you, which is, based on your experience in climate activism, what is the best way for youth and other members of civil society to get involved?
I think they are already involved. They are already being affected, and they are already finding ways to circumvent the impacts of climate change in their lives and the lives of their communities. I think they just don't realize it. And I think I'm a big advocate for people to identify, to see climate change as an amplifier of vulnerabilities that already exist. For instance, like if there is a flooding in my community that prevents me from going to school, I'm not accessing education because climate change is preventing me from doing so. So I think people should not see climate change as this external, individual factor. It's actually a multifactorial phenomena that impacts all different phases of our life. So, but I think in terms of how to get involved, first of all, I think it's very important now that if you see climate change is affecting you somehow, or maybe if you don't see, to seek education on it. I've been fortunate to meet a lot of youth-led organizations here that have started creating workshops, that have started creating courses on Climate Change 101 so that people can understand what is behind it. I am not originally from the climate space. I have 15 years working with youth and human rights, and I always felt so distant from the climate change and injustice debate because it sounded very technical. It sounded like I needed to go to school to understand it. But not necessarily. I was already being impacted by it, and I think that realization is what activated me to join it. So I think looking for information is really important to understand how to act, and also understand understanding what are the needs of your community, right? So I think engaging other young people, listening to each other, and identifying what are our concerns that are common, and how can we together tackle these concerns. I think that is what's going to get people activated. And once they join events and opportunities with other young people, they start seeing, okay, there are spaces that I can occupy with this desire. There are skills that I need to develop to be able to work more professionally on these issues. And that's a one-way avenue. Once you start being empowered, once you learn these new skills, that people start giving you opportunities, there's no way back. I myself started all of this when I was 17 years old, and to me it was such an eye-opening world to be able to access an environment that was promised initially only to adults, and I felt that I was being invited into the decision-making table, and I wanted to be a part of it, and my community endorsed me and supported me in that way. And since then I have never stopped, because I think this is my only way to give back to all the people that contributed for me to get here. So I think young people need to also experience that, especially those that are in the global south that are left with no opportunities. It's really important that they start locally, that they understand the needs of the community, but they identify which are the institutions that can support them so that they can start their activism on a more professional level.
Completely agree with what Italo said. For example, I am from India and someone from the global south, so I can completely resonate to it, because I myself have never experienced snow in my life, so I don't really know how to react to or how to even comprehend what ice caps melting would be like, because that's just not something I see every day, or that's not something that directly affects me. So I think what young people as us who are aware of these issues, we can be the bridge builders between us and the communities, especially because in India, if I go and tell someone about climate change, I don't really think they would relate to it unless I show them examples about how the increasing temperatures and the floods are the result of this climate change. So making it easier to comprehend for these communities who don't have access to education or other resources, or who can't understand the scientific data or research. So that's where youth can do youth can play a really important role. And one other thing is that which came from our We Are Family Foundation global study. We did a global study about intergenerational collaboration and how youth can play a pivotal role in climate justice. And one of the things that we found out was youth have been viewing their emotions as strengths and not weaknesses. And that is something that really stands out to me, because we always bring this human perspective and we see problems as opportunities and try to create win-win solutions, which I think is really important, because at this point of time it's really important for all of us to look at these problems from a human perspective and empathize with people and put ourselves in their shoes, because I know how difficult it is for us to imagine like situations like famines or droughts or even being involved in wars. So that empathy is something that's really important, and I can see the transition of how young people are really putting their emotions into the work that they do with the climate justice itself. And that's something which I think young people can be involved for. But again, while young people have already been taking lead in these initiatives, I also think it's important for the older generations to lower their barriers for young people to scale up their work in these areas, which is also equally important, because it needs to be both ways. It can't just be like young people pushing for this change. It also needs to be the older generations trying to accept and bring in these perspectives equally. So I think that's my take on this.
Thank you. So for me, I have been thinking a lot about this question, and I really believe that activism can start locally, and that makes all the difference than anything else. Like everyone in this pavilion and even everyone at COP, really, we all have an origin climate story, like something that drove us to be here. And it is those little or even big acts that we have been a part of in our 10 years, 15 years, you said 18 years, I don't know how long you like years. That's what brought us here today. And so maybe these spaces aren't as accessible as they should be, which is, a big gap in terms of activism and policy and everything else. But all the works that we are already doing in our communities, that we're doing locally, makes a difference, because as young people, we are stakeholders of all of this climate action that is occurring on the ground, and we are teaching even younger generations about the value, the importance of all of this. And that's why we are setting this gold standard in NDCs on including young people, because they really are the ones that are driving this movement and that will continue to drive this movement. And we even teach some of these things to our elders. Some older people don't really acknowledge that we're in the middle of a climate crisis. Sometimes it's like, oh, why is it, if there was climate warming going on, global warming going on, why is it so cold outside? But that's not how it works. And I really, I come from a family that didn't necessarily believe in the impacts of the climate crises, but it's been so refreshing and wonderful to see their mentality shift into what it actually means to be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. And I really do agree with everyone else here, these panelists, about the role of education. That is so valuable. And education doesn't stop at a young age. It continues for the rest of our lives. And it's really important that we absorb this education. And it's really valuable that we get to be here to talk about this topic, and we get to engage with all of you about the need to make sure that we are building the for young. So thank you for your time on that.
Thank you all for those very insightful remarks, because I think something that stood out for me was your personal quests on this journey, and I think that is a very underrated tool towards a better understanding on how we keep working towards something that feels very intangible and something that you can't see, but it is still a massive driving factor for us. So my last question for you all is, what is your call to action? Ruth, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So my call to action is talk to your colleagues, talk to your party, talk to negotiators about the value of including young people in climate policy and climate action. We have, at Care About Climate, we have worked with over 150 youth ambassadors from around the world. They have been the change makers. They have been the authors of all of the information that we have collected on how to improve their country's nationally determined contribution. And so we have so many people ready to have these conversations. They have the passion, they have the knowledge, and it really is about connecting these voices to each other. It's intergenerational collaboration is critical right now. And it will continue to be critical because the climate crisis won't end from one day to the next. It will literally keep going. And it really is up to us to bridge these huge gaps on collaboration. And so I urge here as part of civil society, if you're here on a party badge, if you're here as an NGO, as an activist on your own right, I highly encourage you to check out more information on the NDC Youth Clause, and let us know if you have any questions and if it's something that your country might want to be part of, because we are so ready to be part of the solution.
Agreed. Again, agreed with everything Ruth said. What I would say is keep an open mind, be open to surprise, and for intergenerational collaboration, many people just assume that when a young person approaches them, it's just because they want to have access to funding in the most cases, or they just want to protest for justice. But I think it really starts with just having a conversation and having that exchange of dialogue, which opens you up to newer perspectives, which is really important. And I strongly believe, and I think we can't deny that the transfer of responsibilities cannot come without the transfer of power. And I think this is the first step that we have taken by proposing the universal NDC youth clause, and I urge you all to adapt it into your organizations as well. Thank you.
About 2 days ago, we had the first country to sign up for the Universal Youth Clause, which was the United Kingdom. We had the launch of this partnership in the UK Pavilion, the presence of amazing speakers, including the Secretary General for Energy and Net Zero at Miliband. But that's just the beginning. We still need to engage in conversations with other countries so that we can get as many countries as possible into this initiative. My fellow delegates here, Doreen, has some QR codes if you want to learn about the Universal Youth Clause. Feel free to reach out to her right when we're done with the panel, but you can also search on Google by Universal Youth Clause to read more about the document, what is the commitment, how can you get involved, how can you reach out to your country. We're ready to support you in that advocacy. And also, please feel free to share it with your contacts, share it in your social media, share it with the young people in your countries so that we can get the word out there. And I feel like if we all support this initiative together, we will be able to reach the decision makers that really need to make a decision about supporting young people in your NDCs. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. I would like to turn it to the audience now for any potential questions you may have for our panelists. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I am from Bangladesh. I am the Global South citizen. Most of the time, not only most of the time, nowadays we have seen that the climate change is happening for the Global North. So we have an organization, youth-led organization named Human City Foundation, and we have two projects which is led by youth basically in the coastal areas and hard-to-reach areas. We have schools where youth come to our schools who are displaced for the climate change. They lost their lands, their homes swept out the river or sea. At the same time, we have a project named Access to Primary Healthcare. We go to the doorsteps of those people who were affected for climate change. And we have been studied that we are initiated this project in 3 years, and we have seen that 50,000 youth came to our project and get the free medical service because of most of the time they not get access to the primary health care, because when they displaced from their land, they lost everything. They are economically lost. They lost their parents lost their jobs. Their parents lost a decent job. So I think youth should come forward to raise their voice. My urge to those youth who are protesting in COP or outside the COP, you should use your intelligence, not be used by someone. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I work for World Vision Canada, and we are advocating for the inclusion of youth and children in NDCs and the National Adaptation Plans. And for me, basically, is if you can talk about how do you feel is the biggest challenge that is being faced for it to happen, because at some discussions that I have been part of, we have mentioned this, but there is no echo, there is no willingness on actually implement this, and there is no funding also available for capacity building to enhance capacities of youth to be ready to actually take part in all of these discussions so that they can be sitting at the table where all of these decisions take place. And I mean to have a really meaningful participation. We need capacity building, we need funding to fund all of these So, and maybe at some point that they are able to receive fund directly and being able to execute it. So in your experience, what do you think is the best way to close this gap so that this can actually materialize in the short term? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I can answer. First of all, I want to thank you for your comment and congratulations on your initiatives in Bangladesh. That's very commendable. We need more people like you implementing your initiatives locally, and I hope that your community is able to achieve the livelihoods and the self-reliance that has been taken away from them because of climate change. To your point, thank you so much for your question. I think the biggest resistance might be probably because of, there are two that I would. I think nowadays the children and youth debates, especially in such a polarized world, has taken a very strange route in which sometimes when you talk about it, you're talking about ideological issues and then there is lack of political will to really dive into the main issues because they might be somewhat supporting a particular ideology, when ideally if you should look at children and youth issues when it comes with the lens of human rights, they have already been agreed upon by all of the countries, of the most countries under the United Nations umbrella. If you look at those, and I think we have a solid base to start looking at what kind of potential solutions could be prioritized for people, for young people and children specifically. I also think that there is a lack of capacity to specify exactly what the NDCs could be for children and youth, because there is funding allocated directly to children and youth in any government's budget, but you need to be able to identify how much specifically will go towards it and have the technical assistance to develop that into your NDCs. There are some countries like, regardless of size, like the island of Vanuatu, they have an NDC annex that lists specifically under each macro area like health, nutrition, education, etc., how much is going towards youth, so for which kinds of programs, under which kind of statistics that support that initiative, the indicators, the targets, etc. Ideally, each country should be able to produce an annex like that, because that is what's going to help us implement the NDCs. So I hope that we're able to, create a narrative, a common narrative around this, the need for NDCs for youth, because otherwise we will continue to see the main agenda of children and youth be taken away by political polarization, and then years of struggle and years of conversations and negotiations around it will pretty much be ignored in the development of the policy that really is defining the topics and the engagement of young people worldwide. I also think, just to finish, that governments need to learn how to reach and engage young people at the local level. My country, Brazil, it has a lot of great initiatives to engage young people. I'm sure that they consult young people to develop the programming. I am sure of it. But I just went to the Brazilian Pavilion, and there's a printout that says the Brazilian climate policy that looks like the people. There's no mention to children and youth whatsoever in the national objectives, in the thematical chapters. There's no statistics on youth or children. There's no indicators. There's no trends mentioned. And then when I open the NDCs, there are 49 pages. There's one mention to children, very superficially, and no mention to youth at all. But this is the country that's going to organize the Youth COP. So what happened? Like I've been trying to reach out to people I know at the government to know what happened here. Like, did we miss anything? Like, why are we not including children and youth? But when I think about the context of the country, I think about the political polarization, how that could be misinterpreted or used and weaponized against the debate about their human rights in the country. So that's why I brought that particular example of polarization as a big challenge, but not applicable only to Brazil, but applicable to, I guess, I'm sure, many countries in the global south.
Yeah, just to add on to what Italo said, it's mostly, even though the funding is allocated to these initiatives, there are some gaps in the training itself. So I think what would be really important is for governments or organizations, even though they provide funding, the value lies in co-creating with the youth from start to finish and helping them by giving them the training on certain aspects where they lack the skills. And it's also giving more importance to lived experiences than just work experience, because I call myself a researcher or scientist and I'm 23 years old, but when you hear a word researcher, people expect you to have like a PhD or like 25 years experience in science. But when I work with communities or like especially like the indigenous youth, I will never know the place like they do. I will never be able to spot the plants or species of animals like they can. So it is also valuing their lived experiences and trying to bring that knowledge into the implementation of these solutions, while also like co-creating with them instead of just allocating the resources and getting it done with. So I think that kind of guiding procedure or having a framework is really important to see the real impacts.
And if I just may add, something that could be very helpful is to do a little research on how the Canadian NDC is developed, because the Paris Agreement unfortunately doesn't provide any standards or guidance on what should be on an NDC, right? Or like how it should be developed. And if I've learned anything from being an NDC advocate, is that there is a very unique way into each country's approach to the information that they utilize and the communities that they speak to. So in Canada, something that I really value about the Canadian NDC, for example, is I do a lot of work on gender as well. And Canada is actually a really great NDC, has a really great NDC on gender. So I love that for y'all. But in terms of youth, I completely understand the frustration that there needs to be a lot more done in the NDC. And while we are hopeful that in the next 4 months that when the new NDC is due, we do see these changes. I think part of the solution, and that's something that we're also internally trying to do, is acknowledge and understand better the development process, how early they start working on it, like how government changes or things like that affect an NDC, and of course the research from the global stocktake, that all of that information is collected and like absorbed, hopefully in a way that creates like an ambitious NDC.
Thank you, guys. I'll take one more quick question from the audience. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Muskan. I work with Care About Climate, so this is the gold standard has been a pretty great achievement with Via Family Foundation in Groundswell. So my question is that the next big step is, of course, to get more and more governments onboarded for the campaign itself. What are the strategies that are in motion to get them onboarded? How can governments approach the three organizations and get the deeper into the clauses? How can they endorse it? So what are the strategies that are in place to make that happen?
That's a great question, Muskan. And this is something that is going to be very important in the next couple of weeks and in the next couple of days as we approach the end of this COP. So the best way that we are approaching this is by having a dialogue, literally having a conversation. We're all human beings here. Just because you have a different color badge doesn't mean that I can't talk to you. So really, what we are, at least the approach that we are taking in this, and of course, my colleagues can talk about their individual approach, is setting up meetings with these negotiators, with these party badge holders, and introducing them to these gold standards that we have created. Letting them ask questions, also like assuring them that this is what's best for everyone, not just something that we're asking, not something that someone just kind of like came up with and is is wanting people to sign on. This is for the good of all generations worldwide, and this is an inclusivity clause. Like, it includes everyone of all ages, of all backgrounds. And so really establishing that as well, like how we are happy to respect your culture, your traditions, the way you want to approach an NDC. It's not about telling anyone what to do. It's not about preaching any message to anyone. It really is about having around inclusivity, around the protection of young people and children, and the inclusion of these negotiators, of everyone. So the best way has been to really, again, have a conversation, and also asking them if this is something that your country is ready to endorse. You know, let's make that official. Let's get a signatory. Let's make an announcement. Let's celebrate that you are ready to make this commitment, and let's help you along the way. Let's help you. There's so many youth that are happy to start working together, and we are more than happy to start bridging those gaps.
Yes, she put it very well. And just to say, what we're trying to do here is not just create a moment. We want this to actually materialize into something. We want this to have an impact after going back from COP as well. But what we're trying to do is also not just have like one solution that fits everything. We're trying to contextualize based on the regions, based on the people itself and the governments, because obviously we have to deal it in a different way when we're dealing with like emerging or like undeveloped economies. For example, we can't just talk about the solutions in the same way that we do in the global north and the global south without talking about the redistribution of resources. We have to approach it in a different way, and especially if we are talking about something for the indigenous communities, or for example, something that youth have been advocating for is renewable energy and like renewable resources. But we also have to think about the just transition, because there could be people losing their jobs. So we really need to think about it from like different perspectives, and think about context-based solutions and work with the local organizations and collaborate with them. Because what we put up here is just a very general clause, which is like accepting, collaborating, and educating the youth. But we are leaving it open to organizations and countries to make very specific goals about how they want to engage with it, and we are very happy to have these conversations and build the frameworks and strategies along with them about how it fits in their organizations or within their governments.
I think I have been very active trying to get the Brazilian government on board. I think what we have to learn from the UK government is that it's really important to find that one person that's going to be your champion internally in the government structure, and that person is going to be helping you really open the doors and open the dialogue with the ones that will make the decisions. Before even I got to COP, which was last Saturday, I contacted some of the ministries that I know. I mean, some ministry staff that I understand, that I know from back in Brazil. It has been hard to pass the staff that work directly with the ministries and trying to access directly the ministers. They've been saying, well, we cannot really endorse this because it requires interministerial discussions. We have already put out our NDCs, but they still have many months until the finalization of the annexes. So I've been having this back and forth dialogue saying, you still have time. Let's work together to make that happen. I have also been reaching out to Congressmen and Congresswomen to get them, those that work with children and youth mainly, to get them to create posts on social media about it, to endorse the campaign. I've been reaching out to influencers that have a national stage so that they can talk about the youth clause. I have been, yesterday I saw on Instagram that there was a Brazilian journalist that I know here, so I literally went to the media section to chase her down. She had already left to the airport, but I got her contact from a colleague, then I sent her an audio about the youth clause and trying to get her to publish something about it. So there are many ways in which we can act upon. Like if you are a journalist, if you know someone in Brazil that you think could connect you to someone that will help make this decision, please share more about the youth clause. Think about creative ways to get this information out there. Even if you can just post about it, and tag the minister of your country, or the people that will in your country related to this, tag them, and perhaps someone will amplify, will share your post as well, and we'll be able to move forward with this. But like I said, we really try as much as possible to adapt it to context and utilize all the resources that we have to make it happen. So I think we have to use the momentum of COP. We cannot let people forget that the NDCs need to be finalized by February. So we will continue engaging in these conversations, and we hopefully will have more people in countries join the movement. Thank you.
Thank you for those responses. And I'm going to wrap up this afternoon and thank our panelists for such insight and their dedication towards working on this clause. This clause holds a lot of power and it holds a lot of momentum for people who are coming after us. And there are a lot of people that we need to hold responsibility towards, and that takes a lot of collective effort and patience and a lot of community support and involvement. And with that, I want to thank everyone and wish everyone luck with the rest of their COP. Thank you.